So I've got to ask, this is such a more vast subject matter than the last documentary. I know this has been something that's that you've had for a while too. What made you guys kind of dive into this? Because I know Joe was on it for a little while, and then it's taken some time to get this one.
It's been about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And basically, I live in Austin. Bill Panoski, the producer, my partner in the film, he lives in Austin. And we were just reading in the paper what was happening with the University of Texas and Texas A&M. And the short story about that is the governor at the time, Rick Perry, had installed these regents who were given marching orders to go inside both schools and kind of rebuild them from the inside out. And so the reason why it was interesting to us is because at an administrative level, nothing ever happens that's really interesting. You have these board of regents, they basically write checks, they spend money, they approve things, but this activity led to almost an impeachment of one person. It led to the attempted firing of the president of UT Austin and the actual firing of other people. And so it was a real story, and we're like, what's this about? And as we waded into it and did our research, we found out that, well, this is not exclusive to Texas. It's happening in other places, or variations of these events are happening. And so we wound up going to Virginia, to UVA, and to Wisconsin, to University of Wisconsin, and then to LSU. And UNC Chapel Hill. And so we found some of the same characters, some of the same organizations involved, and it became a much bigger film.
I've got to ask about Rick Perry. It seems to me that he hits up in a lot of your documentaries. But there is something to that the conservative movement really has impacted our state.
Right. Yeah, no, Rick Perry's in the film only because he's a central character. It was his administration who decided to try to change A&M and UT specifically from the inside out. And he could do that because he has the power to appoint people. So he appointed people who were basically activists who have an agenda to change the nature of the schools in terms of research, in terms of tenure, in terms of all these basic things. And so before Perry, nobody ever done that. The Board of Regents situation at higher ed is really boring. Like I said, it's like usually very successful business people who bring their unbiased, objective opinion to how these places are run. And you bring them in because they have all this experience, right? And so he was appointing people that also have experience, but who also he could help use them as tools to change the universities. And that really had never been done before.
What does it mean that you're yourself a professor? You've been through, obviously, the UT program,
right,
even when you were a student in the master's program.
Right.
Bill's whole family is invested in this, and
right,
his father's legacy.
Right.
This movie obviously is very important to you guys. That must have some merit to it. It's not just another documentary where you're telling someone else's story, but this is very much what you guys, your bread and butter. You guys don't want to see this amazing system crumble away because of some weird choices over the last 30 years.
Right. I mean, we're both the beneficiaries of the system. And my son went to Texas Tech, and I went to, my undergraduate degree is from the University of Southern Mississippi, another public university that just happened to be there, and that I was actually a commuter student. And so, you look at the history of public universities in this country, and the original idea was, as a state and at the federal level, we're going to take money, we're going to pour it into these places because the return on investment will be the people that come out. And you can look at the history of the country, and it really is true. Like if you go all the way back to the Morrill Act that Lincoln signed in 1862, and you see how the country was built out basically from then till now, and populated with engineers and doctors and lawyers and people who knew about agriculture. They really built this country. And so it's one of the ironies of the film. A lot of people who want to change everything have a market orientation. Well, if you want to look at this whole system as a market, it's very successful to the degree that people will send their kids here from China and from all over the world, pay a premium, the highest level for tuition, and all the expense of doing that, and the dislocation, because they know that they're going to have a degree that's very valuable. And so if you're trying to judge things by the market has spoken. Like these are, especially the research universities like UT, A&M, University of Wisconsin, and Chapel Hill. These are exceptional schools in the world, right? There's like, that is a layer of irony that is amazing in the whole story.
As far as research goes, compared to the last film where there was so much about hearsay and gossip,
right,
and it was people pointing fingers, this is based in 100-year-old universities. The research that you've had to put into this project must have been kind of crazy and intense.
It took a long time, and it unfolded like as we were shooting it. We started covering what was happening in Texas, and then we found out about the other places. We started going there, and that led organically to other people. I'll give you an example. One of our key sources in Wisconsin, a guy named Noel Radomovsky, turns out that he was a roommate of the guy who is now the president at LSU, a guy named King Alexander. And that's how we found out about what was happening at LSU. No other way. Like it's not in the media, right? We found that from him. And then he sent me the word that James Carville was going to do this commencement speech. I wrote an email to James Carville. He called me back the same day. And that's how invested he is in what's happening at LSU. And then we went down there and shot that commencement. We went back and shot an interview with him. And I think when people see the film, they're going to be surprised, because Carville is hysterical, but he's also really sober about it. Like it's not a joke, and I think when they see the sobriety he brings to it, it's an eye-opening thing.
How do people get to the level that James is at, where he's, like you said, fully invested? How do people, because it is something that a lot of people just don't know.
Right.
How do they get to the level where they don't want this to happen, because he's fully invested?
Right. I think that people do not know the story. That's the biggest problem. The defunding of public higher ed has taken 35 years. And so it's been incremental, like a little percentage here and percentage there. And it's only risen to the level of public discourse because of student debt and tuition. So that's what people read about all the time. It's very expensive, and people have a lot of debt. But we wanted to go a step deeper and say, like, well, why has this happened? And then look at what's also not been reported. And then is the prescription that some people have for fixing it. And basically ideas that come from market-oriented think tanks. These think tanks that are basically don't believe in the public sector at all. They think that all the solutions are better from the private sector. And they look at public higher ed and they go like, look, these are old institutions. They're enormous. They've got this infrastructure that's hard to maintain. They have salary situations that are ridiculous in terms of people with tenure. They also maybe are teaching frivolous things, or they're having people take classes in things that are silly and not monetizable. There's another element of the way to look at it is like you're going to measure everything by profit and loss. And so one of the things in the film was like at A&M they did a thing where they measured professors by whether they made money for the university or they lost money for the university. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. Like if you're an English professor, you're not a moneymaker. But if you pull in a giant research grant, you are. So that all of a sudden now we're evaluating things based on money rather than based on like, well, should you know about literature or like abstract thought, which is the thing that arguably has made the country so successful. It's like having both of those things, like having the world's best engineers and people who've been exposed to different ways of thinking about stuff like this. So if your whole calibration and measurement comes down to profit and loss, that's a radical departure from the way that we've looked at this for forever.
And yet your film isn't, in my opinion, preachy, and it shows
Right.
a lot of those think tank individuals.
Right. Yeah, we try to let them speak for themselves, and it's a legitimate debate. Like if you have a very libertarian bent, the purest form of libertarianism basically believes that the state has no role in public higher education. The state is a very limited government, right? And that maybe it was a mistake from the beginning for public money to be spent on education. And so, if that's how you look at it, and you have a purely market orientation to it, then the debate is a valid one. And I think that what the film tries to do is lay it out like, well, this is the way that these people look at it. This is the way that historically people looked at public higher ed, was that we're going to pour resources in to these inefficient institutions because the people who come out are going to return that investment. So you either subscribe to that or say like, well, that, and this is what you'll hear, it's in the film, people will say like, well, that might have been okay in 1862. It may have been okay at World War II, when so much the feds invested so much in research. But now it's a different time. We now have the internet, we have Google, we have information at people's fingertips. We don't have to have these giant buildings, all this stuff. We don't have to have this overhead that's crazy. Like, we can do this in a modern way. And so that's all legitimately a question. That's how we try to posit it in the film. It's like you can watch it, and we also try not to offend people. So in terms of the people in political parties, like in the film, we never put a little R or a little D by people's names. We just said like what their role is, because it's not our job to like be explicit about that. We let people talk about their ideas, and then that's better, we think, because it allows people to agree or not agree and have an opinion about it without castigating people for being in one party or the other. And but people know people are not dumb. They know politically where people are, and but we want to give people room. We want to make room for people to come away from the film and go like, I never thought about it that way. Because it's one thing to have an ideology. It's another thing to see that ideology enforced on a system like public higher ed, and then have a moment where you go like, this is an outcome possibly that I didn't predict. And allow people to, if they want to advocate for their schools. To say like, well, I didn't realize this was the case, and I've got to take a stand about this. Or not. Or maybe they look at it and go like, these people are exactly right. But it's not our job to say it, but it is our job to report it and to put it in a context where it can be framed by the legitimate philosophical debate that's in there. Like, I believe what we've done is great, and I think you can make the case that in public higher ed, the evidence is there. Like, the evidence is there based on like people who will spend a lot to send their kids here from China to get a great education. Or it's not. Like, this is a different time. We have to move on. So that's what we think about it.
So with the title Starving the Beast, when do we hit that tipping point where either the beast somehow bites back or dies? You know what I mean?
I think that it's totally up to the citizens of the country. The people in the, one of the insidious things about the story is that all the people at the public universities are essentially state employees. They draw their paycheck from the state. And they're also prohibited by law from lobbying the legislature. So they're circumspect about what they'll say. And that goes from the professors to the administration. And that's part of why this problem has evolved so far as it has, where it's snowballed over all these years. I won't say snowballed, but like it's like a glacier actually, where it's like gradually happened. Because people want their jobs, right? And they will go along with incremental changes for all the right reasons, and then sometimes because there's no alternative. Like, how can they voice this? So I think we've had people come out of the woodwork about the film to thank us because we've articulated something that the universities can't, and sometimes the people in the universities can't, in a way hopefully that frames it for people who have a vested interest because they went to this university or they have kids that are going to go, can stand up, and make a case for it.
Well, Steve, to kind of last question, obviously documentary is a passion for you, but I mean, I'm a fan of like Arlo and Julie and your fiction side.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask what, after you get through pushing this film to the masses, hopefully, what's next?
Well, I'm actually writing a script right now for a fiction film.
Really?
And it's great. It's going to be terrific. And I don't want to sound like Donald Trump. It's going to be great. Believe me. No, it's really good. And I'm writing it for a couple of actors. I wrote Arlo and Julie for the actors who are in it. Mm-hmm. And this is the same thing. In fact, one of the actors was in Arlo and Julie. And I love doing that. Like, it's fun. It's actually a lot easier than a documentary because it's very intense. We shot the last film, I think, in 17 days. And so they're long days, but it's a lot more fun to get to work with people. It's a fun environment. And, documentary takes so long. And usually, like, a lot of those shoots is just me and Bill. Mm. And then not every day, spaced out over weeks and months, and a lot of editing, and then re-editing. So it's a different thing altogether. And I love all of it. I like to work. And none of it's like a real job to me. That's a great thing. It's like I've had a real job. This is not a real job. And but it's a lot easier to do a fiction piece because you can basically put your fish in a barrel and shoot them rather than like going out all over the world trying to figure out what the story is in a documentary. So yeah, I enjoy all of it.
And you heard it first here. That's up next with
Steve.
Steve.
Yeah. It's called Relic, by the way.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Steve. Thank you for the wonderful interview.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope people witness Starving Beast. I mean, I was moved by it, and I want people to make change, just like Mr. Carville. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.